Okay, so look, guys, as I explained at the top of this episode, I'm still very much so playing retail World of Warcraft and having the time of my life. So we started to touch on retail on the last episode of the show with just a sneaky 4.5 hours worth of general retail conversation, which so many of you got back to me and said you actually really enjoyed. And it's really good to hear that so many of you guys who have gone with me through Classic over the years are also dabbling in retail and are more than happy for the show to start broaching the topic of retail. So I figured, fuck it. Let's go full hog here and let's get, old school countdown style with the conversation and dive deep in the weeds on what's been happening with one of the topics has come up with class balancing with patch 11.0.5 coming just around the corner. There's been a really interesting conversation about the amount of changes that have gone out for the classes, but also, I've been talking in the Discord about how one particular class, Shaman, it was a Bible. I was sort of not being that hyperbolic when I was like, I made the joke on Twitter saying when Blizzard announced the changes for Shaman for 11.0.5, it started with in the beginning. It was just epic. But I've dived into the subreddit for, r/wow, and I've gone back to my roots and said, I want to find some really, intelligent, well-spoken people who know what they're talking about to come on the show and just have a chat with me about what's going on. And I managed to find one who said, yes, I'm so happy to have him here. Declan, mate, thank you so much for going out on a limb and joining me.
Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here, though I don't know if I fit all of the descriptors that you put out just then. But thank you for having me.
In the 3 minutes that we've chatted before I hit the record button, believe me, I can tell you're going to be fantastic. I'll just explain to the listeners that the reason that I grabbed you for the show is I was looking for some, like I said, some good posts on the subreddit about this topic, about class balancing in 11.0.5. And you made a great post that really sung to me. It was, it was lengthy, it had a lot of meat on the bones, and you were very, very passionate about your particular class and spec, that being Elemental Shaman. So we're not just going to talk about Ele Shaman, but that will obviously be a bit of a focus and a spotlight here. But just as a side note, before we get into the chat, I woke up this morning and I went to, read your posts again and do a bit of research and remember, what it was that hooked me about what you said. And I was shocked to find that the bloody moderators deleted it for apparently brigading. Were you shocked to get that? Do you get like a notification saying it's been taken down?
Yeah, so I was not expecting anything from that post. You never do you? You just put something out there and it either gets some traction or it doesn't. But it did pick up and I was getting, 50, 60,000 views an hour. And it was really, I was getting lots of notifications. My phone was vibrating. It was great. And then, yes, I woke up the next morning thinking, oh, I'll check my phone. I've probably got loads of notifications again. And it all stopped and everything had disappeared. So that was a little shocking because I think there was a lot of really good conversation there. But the rules are rules. And the reason it had been deleted is because I'd reached out on the Elemental Discord and said to them, here's a post I've made. If you agree, please feel free to like it, share it, all the usual stuff we do to try and grow the audience.
Is that the reason why? I know yes. I know reaching out for upvotes is against the rules, but is that actually the reason why? I thought they pinged you for I don't know whether they thought you went too hard on the devs or something, which I don't think you did.
No, and we've got members. Obviously, there's a member on the Reddit moderation team who's also an Elemental Shaman member, and they filled me in a little bit, and it was just that it was simply that I had requested support, and for whatever reason that had got back to the main team. So yeah, innocent from me. I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
I understand the rule.
It's definitely rules are rules. It's like a foot fault in tennis. It's like, oh come on, my toe was on the line. Who cares? Very good. Well, mate, to get into what the content of that post was, maybe just before we get to Shaman, I'll just ask you some easy questions to sort of get you, all limbered up and stretched out for the podcast here. Mate, prior to 11.0.5 being announced and getting to read through those patch notes, how had you felt about class balancing in totality through the War Within thus far?
It's a really good question because actually the picture that we had coming into the launch of The War Within was several unfinished reworks. Actually, Elemental was one of them, but there were several. Hunter hadn't had their full rework through. I think Rogue were expecting a significant number of changes and nothing happened. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Mages and Warlocks have been through it as well. And so I think what we actually ended up with was just a few highly dominant specs that were working extremely well, and then some very, very weak specs that were basically unviable in high end content, not your heroic raiding and sort of middle end plus and stuff. But when we talk about the sort of high end of Mythic, there was clearly specs that you had to favor and those that didn't. And I suppose that's always the case, but I think what really stood out was some of the half-bakedness of what we were experiencing. And from an Elemental Shaman perspective, it was so half-baked that we ended up spamming. I mean, it looked a little bit like a vanilla rotation. We were spamming Lightning Bolt pretty much always with a couple of interludes of other things. It was tragic, really, for this level of development. And we were all awaiting 11.5 as a result, but 05, sorry.
Yeah, definitely. Like, trust me, after years and years of Classic, you sort of move away from that wanting to get a bit more out of your rotation. And if they reverted back to an incredibly brain dead one because the numbers dictated that that's what you had to do, then that's a bit of a shame. But we'll definitely dive into the Ele Shaman stuff. Mate, just going off of what you said there, I sort of am prompted to go off, not on so much of a tangent, but the extra question, and to get listeners feeling out a bit more of the gauge on yourself, Declan, where you lie on your general ethos surrounding class balancing. I've asked this question many times on the show before of guests, and I'm always interested in what people's answers are, and everyone seems to sort of, be a little bit different subjectively, obviously. But are you more of a close enough is good enough type person when it comes to class balancing or high-end class balancing? Or, sometimes on Reddit, we do really see that I will accept nothing less than perfection. If there's more than a, 1%, move away from the, I forget the mathematical term that I'm looking for here. But, I don't want the range to be that great on differences between these specs. Or do you fully sort of say, look, the game dev can be hard. Look, if it's a few percentage points off, then so be it. Where do you kind of lie on this one?
I think I'm fairly pragmatic with it. I don't want a huge range between top and bottom, but I'm not expecting within a percentile of top and bottom. I think there's far too many moving parts for a start. And I think one of the really important things to remember when we're talking about raiding in particular, but all content that we consume, is that it has a lot of characteristics that define it, and those characteristics play into different specs, strengths and weaknesses. So you might find that on one fight, one particular spec is performing very well because it really suits their damage profile. Perhaps they've got the right number of cooldowns, perhaps they're bursty enough, all those kind of things. And then another class seems to fall off for whatever reason because their profile doesn't match the demands of that fight. But when it comes to the overall picture, I just want people to be close and competitive. I don't want to come into a raid and feel like I can't come top of my team if I play the best.
Right.
And I think what we sometimes see in WoW, and it varies. I mean, my opinion and that of many of the people I play with was that during Dragonflight there was a couple of patches, particularly near the beginning of the expansion, where they got balanced extremely good, and nearly any spec was competitive, save for maybe one or two. And it's that feeling of if I play the best, can I come top? And I think sometimes you see that, and sadly at the moment I don't think you do.
Okay, fair enough. Mate, just to get your thoughts on, again, just before we really dive into 11.0.5, just to get your thoughts on the launch window of The War Within. You mentioned rogues, you mentioned hunters, and we've got a hunter in chat who's screaming and is very unhappy about their class. But, well, they're saying fix marksman hunter. I thought marksman hunter were obliterating things right now, but again, I have no idea what I'm talking about, so don't take my word for it. But what classes or specs really were standing out to maybe more so you than the rest of the community as being problematic through that 1 or 2 month launch window of War Within?
So oh, I will freely admit I haven't got my fingers in every pie, so there's some of this that eludes me as well. I saw Fire Mage yo-yoing all over the place. There was a week where they were suddenly top. Turns out there was a bug. They suddenly dropped bottom. Then they were mid. You know, I think at the last graph I looked at, they'd dropped 18 places, you know, in the rankings. So Fire Mage has been all over the place. BM Hunter really struggled. They had an issue with their playstyle, actually. BM Hunter has always been, I think, a spec that has called to a lot of people who are looking perhaps for a slightly simpler rotation, but also it's very specific in how it plays. And I think they really tried to move away from that in the War Within to their detriment. And it ends up being this sort of weird multi-dotting spec. And it just really lost its vibe completely. And then their balance went off. And what was really strange about that was there was a huge amount of dialogue from that community saying, we don't like this isn't what we wanted. And actually, you've created yourselves a real problem here in terms of balancing, because now it's all about this. It was all around this one individual talent providing nearly 40% of their damage, which is insane. This one talent node is nearly half their damage. And they were like, you backed yourselves into a corner of balance where you can't do anything about this now. And as a result, they sucked basically in all content. And you know, we've got a hunter in our guild who's played BM as long as I've known her, and she abandoned it because it was so poor when it came out. Ele Shaman I spoke about, they weren't necessarily performing poorly, but they had really a very questionable rotation in terms of what we would expect from the quality at this point. Those are the ones that stick out to me. We've seen Warriors. I think Fury Warrior received 4 consecutive nerfs over the last 2 months. They've now just been buffed again. So it's that kind of thing.
Right. Well, mate, that's the negative of it. We'll do the flip side of the coin, and I'd ask, are there specs that, you know, again, maybe kind of stood out more positively to you maybe than you were hearing from the community? Which specs do you feel they fucking nailed?
I think Frost DKs were very happy. They've been really pleased with their performance, but also you know, some of the rotational things that they now have to do. I think they're just having a good time, Frost DKs. Certainly ours is. I think from a tanking perspective, there was a bit of trepidation around the blood DK. That was a bit interesting, but I think that came out the other side, and a lot of people have been enjoying that and its new profile for defensives. It's a difficult one. Enhancement Shaman, I think they've really enjoyed themselves, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that they've got specs that can deal with pretty much any damage profile thrown at them. So any requirement any fight has, an Enhancement Shaman has the answer. So I think they've been having a particularly good time.
Right, what they've got the burst, they've got prolonged damage, they've got like
Sync
the right
target, AoE,
cooldown
cleave.
timers. They got it all.
Yeah, they've got it all. Yeah.
There you go. Mate, I'm not sure. I just asked, what's your main game here? Are you a Mythic Plus man, or are you a Raider, or what are we looking at here?
I'm definitely a Mythic Raider at heart. That's my big love. I have to do M plus as part of that because it brings us power in our vault. We get some really nice loot from that. It's not my favorite, and I think the reason I struggle with M plus in particular is the timer. I find the timer very stressful.
Oh, it's
and
my
I'm
favorite.
A strategic kind of.
It's weirdly, like I said, I did my first Mythic Plus ever like 10 days ago, and I've just become obsessed. It's now my favorite thing in the game, and I can't believe every other game doesn't have this.
It's a lot of replayability. I really celebrate M plus as a feature of the game, and it's clear it's extremely popular. I think for me, I think if I was maybe able to build a really reliable team and I had the time, I could really get stuck into it and love it. I think there's I'm sure a lot of people who listen to this will identify. There's a lot of stress when it comes to pugging and sort of playing with strangers, because you make one mistake and it feels like the key's over, and there's a lot of sort of and the key belongs to someone, so you're kind of destroying their key. And I think so in pugs, I think it just feels a little bit sort of stressed and strained. But yeah, I can totally see in an organized group how much fun that could be.
Yeah, I've definitely started to experience the difference between pugging keys and running with, groups of friends and everything. And there's no doubt it's more fun with friends. Just get people and everyone jumps in voice and it's coordinated. Mistakes are fewer, fewer and fewer in between. Pugging, you're rolling the dice and all of that stuff. But also, people say, oh, you never ever pug. It's just toxic as fuck. And don't get me wrong, that toxicity is there. But I would go, I really sort of balk at the never do it comment, because not from you, I mean, saying obviously people say that, but it's just more that it's about your attitude. I look at it more as like a game of pickup basketball. When you go to the basketball court and when you elect to play with randoms and people you don't know, you literally don't know what you're getting, and you might cost you, or someone on your team might cost your team the court and court time, and you have to get off when you lose and wait for the next game. But I mean, if you didn't want to do that, then you would just organize to play with friends and up your chances of success. But, when you start a Mythic plus pug and it's your key, I don't feel bad for blowing someone else's key, because I'm like, well, they knew what they were throwing on the craps table with their key there. They knew the risks involved.
I completely agree with that sentiment. I think it's particularly challenging as a DPS at the moment because the queue times are so long. I think people rightly can feel a little aggrieved when they've queued for maybe 20, 30 minutes to get into keys. And then within 5-10 minutes, that key falls apart. It can feel like you're not playing the game at all at that point, and that you're having your time spent just pressing, can I join this key? Can I join this key? And that plays into our balanced conversation as well, as I'm sure we'll talk more about. But certain classes getting there much quicker than others. So I totally respect that, and I think you're right. There's got to be a level of expectation that when you step into anything with people you don't know, you're taking a risk that some of your time will be spent maybe teaching them or learning from them, or just messing it up and giving up.
Exactly.
That's part of it.
Brox, I'll bring you into the mix. We've got Broxygos sitting here very patiently and
Hi,
quietly enjoying the conversation. Hi, Brox. Mate, you just commented, I'll bring us back to the question that I had for Declan about what were your thoughts and feelings about, just before we dive into the 11.0.5 chat, what's been your feelings on everything up to this point? And he touched on something that resonated with you about buffing Frost DK. Is that right?
Yeah. Past couple of expansions have been really good for Unholy, and they've kind of stomped everything. But and Frost DK has always been kind of in the back seat of the DK spec. So seeing that shine in the first few weeks, month, well, however long it's been now of the expansion, has been really good. I mean, I have recently switched to blood tanking, and I'm enjoying that now. But yeah, doing the couple of mythics that I did or heroics and mythics as Frost was really good to experience after such a long, absence of being part of the top few DPS specs. So, and there was some others that I can't really think of right now that I was surprised to see up the top. But in respect to the negatives, to see marksmanship and fire mage down low in the meta was so surprising to me, especially in the last expansion. Fire Mage and Arcane were just stomping everything.
Right. So am I going crazy? Maybe it's a PvP thing, but I've been hanging out with Marcus too much, because I thought they did something with marksmanship a week or two ago that I know it's got them just everyone playing them in arenas and they're destroying stuff. I don't know whether or not that's translated to the PvE environment.
I'm not really over it too much, but I have done a few battlegrounds, and yeah, marksmanship hunter with their rapid fire or whatever it's called,
Oh,
that just wrecks people.
it's out of control. It's just ridiculous. And of course, you see the shift, and every man and his dog starts to play one as soon as the changes come in. But anyway, mate, back to the DK. If I can just ask, so you mentioned a few things there, but would you grade yourself as being happy overall or unhappy with how DK was looking balancing wise through the first month or two of War Within?
No, really good actually. Yeah, you know, disregarding the meta and the tiered lists that you see, all three specs really felt really strong, especially through leveling. And then when, 80 and doing, normal dungeons and heroics and even delves, each of the three specs just felt really, really solid, good DPS, good survivability, as, most DKs pretty good anyway with Death Strike Go Burr. But it was really good. And I mean, I haven't played much DK in the last few expansions purely because I wanted to be Frost and it wasn't exactly viable. So it's been really good actually.
Okay, Declan, I'll come back to you, mate. And it's good time. You've got the guildies in the chat there cheering you on, saying who's that hunky Ele Shaman in this podcast. Well, let's get him rolling.
Oh yes, okay, yeah. That's him. Sorry about that. Yeah.
No, not at all. I love seeing the guildies or the fans write in for sure, mate. Look, we'll come to 11.0.5 and more drawing back to your Reddit post that started all of this. We might as well start on the Shaman and just say, again, starting generally and getting more specific as we go on. The 11.0.5 patch notes were significant. They were quite the read. And like I mentioned at the top of this episode, when I got to Shaman, I was like, I'm not used to patch notes in general because I'm a classic player, but it's become more of a thing through Season of Discovery. But I'm certainly very foreign to retail patch notes. And when I got to the Shaman section, I'm not being that hyperbolic when I was like, my jaw was on the ground with how much of a novel this thing was. What was your initial reaction to the Shaman changes, the read on the whole? I mean, this just seems like a relatively significant class overhaul. Is that how you would term it or not?
I think it was in many ways a return to old, actually. Although there's a lot of new stuff in there. Elemental Shaman has had for sort of particularly the last two seasons of Dragonflight and as I explained earlier, the beginning of War Within, a very poor rotation in terms of the quality and in terms of what it required of the user. And I think that was becoming very frustrating for people who were interested in skill expression and also interested in the idea of being an elemental shaman. Let's not forget that it's in the name, using all the elements, instead of just spamming one spell. Season 3 and 4 of Dragonflight, it was all about Lava Burst. Then the beginning of War Within, it was all Lightning Bolt. So when that big sort of list of notes started coming out, and it did grow over time, I was active on the beta for 11.05. I was doing lots of the testing as it was coming along and feeding back on the Elemental Discord. And it was exciting, really exciting, and it picked upon all the things that I was worried about in terms of the spec. I felt, and what we had seen as well in the War Within beta, which as I said to you, was unfinished and then became this terrible one spell spam. It felt like they were finally finishing it. They were finally hitting all those things that we were excited about in the War Within beta. It was finally happening. And I will say, last week, the first week of 11.05 was exciting and really fun.
Mate, was it just Ellie? I'd have to go back and double check. Was it just Ellie that feels like it's really being, given a bit of love or retooled for the better or whatever, but or has enhancement and restoration gotten the same amount of love and attention?
I think the launch of the expansion saw all three specs getting significant attention. There had been quite a lot of dialogue prior to the launch. Actually, the Shaman as a class had been fairly neglected by the developers. It had received very little development time. Patch notes were, we were frequently missing entirely from patch notes throughout Dragonflight and before. And a lot of the concerns just seemed to be falling on deaf ears. I think as soon as we were announced to be part of the list of reworks for War Within, there, and that was true for all 3 specs, there was a lot of excitement around that. I think Resto came out very strong, and and they're very happy generally with the state of their spec.
Gee, now. Are they? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, have you seen the data? I think it's something like 70% or something of all high-end keys.
Yeah, I was going to go down that tangent with you. We might as well do it now that we're here. I mean, you will know better than me. I thought it was something like 55%, but it's an obnoxious figure, whatever it is, that the amount of people healers that are going to high keys, over half of them, of the multiple healing options that you have spec-wise in the War Within, over half of them are playing fucking Restoration Shaman. Now, that to me, we talk about, like I said before, what kind of deviation do you want to see in the numbers with class balancing? How upset do you get over a difference of a few percentile points and blah, blah, blah. I personally, now I'm not like hopping mad over this, but I mean, quite the cocked eyebrow when I see that figure with Restoration Shaman, where I go, well, hang on. I get that my understanding, and again, everyone here will know better than me, my understanding is that this is not as much of a throughput issue. It's not saying, oh my God, can you see those heals that Shaman throw out? It's a utility issue where they've just got the buttons that other classes do not have, and their repertoire is so insanely well fit for high-end Mythic Plus action that it's just become, I don't want to say a joke, but somewhat feels like you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're not bringing a Resto Shaman. That, to me, is a huge fucking problem. But I don't know if other people are as upset about it or anything. How do you feel about it?
I think it's one of those self-perpetuating problems to an extent. I think people see it happen and it happens more, which is, I suppose, how a meta forms, right? And I think it is outrageous. I think it is outrageous that we're seeing this level of Resto Shaman. And I think you're absolutely right that it's not a throughput issue. It's a utility issue. I think it is fair to say that you have to bring the throughput. And there is a reason that Resto Shaman is taken as high as it is, all the way to the top, as we know. And that is because it does have very competitive throughput in 5-man content, not least because it has this enormous repertoire of cooldowns. It has a button to press sort of every minute, every 30 seconds, to deal with the problem. And it also has a lot of passive healing through its totems, Healing Rain, that allow it to use all that utility without giving up huge amounts of throughput. So it does stand strong, and I think you really, you're right when you say it's a utility issue. But how much of that is the Shaman design problem, and how much of that is the dungeon design problem, is a question I would have, because we didn't see, the Resto Shaman utility kit hasn't really changed. They've had Poison Cleanse for a long time. Tremor Totem's been there for a long time. We've had Capacitor Totem for ages. These are, Thunderstorm. All of these are part of the class repertoire and have been for a while. It's only now that we're seeing Resto Shaman shine. And I think that comes down to dungeon design, not class design. And I think they've been careless with that, because poisons and curses are all over the place.
And it comes down as well, like you're saying, obviously the dungeons are designed the way they are, but also, at the end of the day, Blizzard sits there designing their menu for the season for Mythic Plus, and they're choosing, the proverbial starters and main courses and desserts. They get to pick their buffet menu. And when you do select dungeons that have a lot of poison and that so clearly favor one healer, like it does just have me scratch my head a little bit. Now, don't get me wrong, I love playing a Resto Shaman, but it's just to give you this sort of info on me, Declan, I guess I'm maining a Holy Priest. I have just been adoring my Holy Priest through Mythic Plus dungeons, and like I say, I'm only doing 7s and 8s as my sort of peak right now, and listeners, relax. I can relatively confidently say it's not skill issue that I'm not going higher. It's I need gear like the desert needs the rain. I think I'm 612 eye level, and people look at me and go like, ew. But, you know, it's one of those things where it does feel, it's fun to play, you know, the non-meta spec, which is basically any healer that's not Resto Shaman. So it is kind of cool to go into a Mythic Plus and be like, see, you didn't need a Resto Shaman. We fucking absolutely nailed that with no dramas. But then there's also always going to be times when, I mean, yeah, sure, you're going to be declined for not being a Resto Shaman. I can get over that form of rejection, but more that, just beating that stereotype that if you're not the best, you're the worst as a healer. You know, if you're not playing Resto Shaman, you're a horrible healing spec. When it's just like, it's not true.
I think, yeah, for sure. 100%. And I want to add as well, there is something, though, that Resto Shaman do bring that is beyond throughput and beyond utility. I should have mentioned this before. And it is, I don't know how aware of this you are, but they bring a lot of buff to total health pool.
Yes.
That's huge.
Yes.
Because that's effectively DR in another form. It's effective health pool. And they can bring up to 20% when you're buffed by both their abilities. So if they time it right, they're giving people 20% health. I mean, it's a huge part of their profile. It is really important to recognize that. But yes, you know, I think couple that with the fact that we now bring a group buff, and you see Shaman have, I suppose, no drawbacks anymore.
Oh, here we go. I'm getting some facts thrown my way from a friend of the show, Parallax, who runs Mythic Pluses with me in real time, who says 9 out of the 10 top runs in the world right now, as we speak, use a Prot Paladin and a Discipline Priest, which is interesting to see. Although I know Disc Priests are very popular, I get that. But yeah, it's interesting to see they're not throwing the Resto Shaman in the mix there in the top 10. Thanks for that, Parallax. All right, Declan, let's bring you back to your bread and butter. Let's talk about, like I said, the big changes for Ele Shaman. Tell me and the Ele Shaman nerds out there who are excited for all this stuff coming their way, what they can look forward to, what changed that had to change, and why it's good.
So the crux of the issue with Elemental Shaman that has now been changed, and why we're so much more fun to play, is that we were in a position where Lightning Bolt was almost always the best use of our GCD. Even in lieu of spenders, Lava Burst, procs, right, you know, where we can send our Lava Burst into it was Lightning Bolt was our everything all the time. And the reason for that is because, well, twofold. It has cooldown reduction. It had cooldown reduction attached to it. But more importantly, that cooldown reduction affected everything in our kit. Our defensives, our utility, our DPS spells, everything was affected by this global cooldown, our interrupts. So it was always really the answer to press Lightning Bolt, because as a result, you'd get your interrupt quicker, you'd get your defensive quicker, you'd be able to give everyone a speed boost again quicker, you'd be able to poison cleanse quicker, you'd be able to use your cooldowns again quicker. So it just meant all you did was Lightning Bolt. That has gone completely. They have actually literally removed cooldown reduction entirely. And what you now have, and I think this is really to be celebrated from Blizzard in terms of their rework, is that we are definitely seeing the majority of our spells used to form a cohesive rotation. So if you're somebody out there, maybe thinking of dusting off the Elemental Shaman, now's a really good time. It's got a burst profile, which we didn't have before, proper cooldowns. It's using lightning, lava, fire, elemental blast as a combination. It's got frost in there. It's a really fun thematic spec with great audio-visual feedback. And I think for me as a competitive player, the burst profile is the most exciting part of it. Being able to go into Ascendance form and kill something if I want to.
So having said all that, now getting to the post that you made, it seems that you come across as someone who's happy with the broad strokes that Blizzard has done on the fun or gameplay of the class, but there's something going on with the numbers. Is that right? Because now, look, everyone knows that we've sort of had our fun little fawning over Ele Shaman, but everyone knows that a couple of weeks ago, everyone was running to the subreddit to talk about how broken they were. Oh my God, have you seen these numbers, this damage? This is, what were they thinking? And obviously there was the issue there with, I believe, Outlaw rogues and Elemental Shaman. There were some shenanigans going on behind the scenes that were causing numbers to, you know, go 25, 30% above everyone else. This obviously put the spotlight and the target on your beloved Spec's back. Blizzard's now come in to do something to adjust those numbers, and you've said, holy shit, they're about to go way too far. Can you explain to everyone, what was the deal with Ele Shaman? What was broken? What are they trying to fix, and why do you say they're fixing it wrong?
So the start of that week saw Elemental Shaman, for context, there was some very popular viral clips going around. Viral, I don't know how viral World of Warcraft content gets, but it was of a Elemental Shaman doing well over 20 million DPS on 5 target dummies. And in dungeons, that was being replicated on occasion with the correct lineup of buffs. You know, we had our Ascendance form, heroism, PI, some augmentation, and for those that are about to go, but augmentation evokers get to keep their DPS. It doesn't go to the other class. It does sometimes, sadly, because they still haven't sourced out all of the damage hooks. So a lot of elementals damage actually sticks with them, even though it should go back to an augvoker. So you saw actually an alignment, I guess, an aligning of the stars that meant that Elemental Shaman on occasion was able to produce enormous AoE damage. They hit this within, I think it was within 48 hours, with an immediate nerf to our lightning rod, which is the debuff we spread on targets, and then it replicates some of our nature damage. That got halved in its value, and that really brought us down straight away to still a very strong level, but definitely not a huge outlier as people saw at the beginning of the week. After that hit, and I think the Elemental Shaman community were very happy with that. We agreed it needs to happen. We could see that we were overperforming on levels that were unnecessary. We felt like what was going to come next was maybe just some little tuning, you know, perhaps an aura nerf of a couple of percent, or specifically hitting some of our AoE, which maybe was still producing extremely high burst levels. But what we were, I think, identifying as a community as well was that our single target was looking strong and on the top end, but definitely not anomalous and definitely not something that looked outrageous. When Blizzard then announced further tuning on, I want to say, the Monday, maybe it was the Friday, forgive me, can't quite remember all the time frames, what they were offering as a further tuning for Elemental hit single target over twice as hard as it was going to hit AoE. And our single target, had it been hit by that, would have been so low that it would have gone not only bottom, but bottom by a solid 10%. And we talked before about that importance from my perspective, that if I'm playing the best, I should be able to compete near the top of those meters. This was going to take us well out of that range. And I've played this game for 20 years since launch, you know, and I see buffs and nerfs all the time. It's a part and parcel of bringing specs closer that play in very different ways. This was so detached from the reality of what the spec was seeing, and it didn't solve the problems they wanted to solve. To the point where actually they've reverted some of those nerfs. I don't know if you're aware, but some of those nerfs actually ended up not going through as a result. Right.
So that now, so they've since changed their mind post you making that post. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I would never take credit for that, but I like to think I did a little part. I was a little part of that community shout out, and there was a lot of work behind the scenes, I know, in the Elemental Discord from our theory crafters, the people that do our sims and things, are, I'm sure, in direct communication as well. So, and loads of people made posts and threads. Yeah, but I was a little part of that, I like to believe.
Oh no, yeah. Absolutely, take credit. I'm happy to throw credit your way. I thought your post was fantastic, and I'm sure it absolutely had a little bit to do with it, mate. You'd be shocked. But also, I mean, the tangent from that is, you know, maybe let's say prior to finding out, whether it was a few days ago or whatever, that Blizzard wouldn't be going as far as they were going, planning to go with the nerfs. How would you describe the reaction and the thoughts being thrown back and forth amongst the Ele Shaman community? And I've not visited, like the retail Elemental Shaman Discord. Maybe you can tell us what that's like. What was everyone saying?
I think the general consensus was, if this goes through, we are literally irrelevant in all forms of content. And I want to stress that is important, is that just because our single target's been there, that doesn't mean that we get a free pass in M+, because anyone who's done any higher keys, certainly on tyrannical weeks where you're slightly lower so it alternates, will know that boss damage and getting through fights is incredibly important. And I mean, we can all remember the beginning of the season, the third boss in NW, where you have to burst him down. Stitch Flesh, is that what he's called? He has to be burst down. Really, he gets hooked down off his platform.
Yeah. Stitch Flesh.
And, and burst profiles and stuff like that were really important. Single target damage is important in all content. It isn't just a raid thing. It isn't just to stand there. We call it patchwork damage from back in the day in Naxxramas. It isn't just that. Single target damage has a place in all content, and we were going to be so gutted that people were basically just saying we may as well go enhancement. And that is, I think, actually really important to acknowledge, that whilst Elemental was getting gutted in this initial set of notes, enhancement, which was performing better, by the way, in the we saw in the aggregate data that actually enhancement was outperforming Elemental, was getting this sort of nerf buff sort of kiss curse change. I think they're having a bug fix, but also a bit of a aura nerf, and it was, I don't know the exact numbers, but it was barely changing basically. And so the answer that people were coming up with was, okay, well, I guess we're all going enhancement then, because we've got most of the gear and I've worked really hard on this character. Elemental is not going to work next week, so I guess I'm going enhanced, which is not an option for me, because if I go into melee, I immediately die, and it's really embarrassing. But I think for a lot of people that was the route they were looking to take.
I must ask. I'm not really asked sort of my friends and followers this question. And again, everyone, please, if you're hearing me for the first time in this interview, like I'm so brand new to retail, it's ridiculous. I'm absolutely a baby, but. Is it the case that the game is like a Mythic Plus environment is just that much easier from a caster point of view, sitting back in the back line? Like I say, I play healer, and I get that. I mean, I think healer is probably the hardest role right now. I think a lot of people seem to agree that healing in the War Within is challenging, to be euphemistic. Don't get me wrong, I've actually changed my stance on healing a lot over the last 6 weeks, where I was very boisterously loud about Blizzard's gone too far with the difficulty of healing in the War Within, but I sort of buckled down and actually practiced and got good, and now I've changed my tune very much and say, actually, I really like healing, and whilst it is still challenging, it's more than doable. So putting that aside, I would just sort of say, but I have a lot of comfort sitting in the back row in a Mythic Plus, and despite the fact that I'm healing, just being 20 yards back from everyone, I can sit here and survey the battlefield and move when I need to move, and it's all great. I don't have to worry about frontals, is lovely. And I sit there, and I haven't run a Mythic Plus as a melee character yet, and I'm like, I genuinely wonder if it is harder up front like I imagine it is, because you're just doing your rotation, but you're avoiding swirlies, but you're also like the frontals, I feel, would kill me. I don't know.
I think it can be chaotic. I mean, I've not really done anything as melee, and I think that in itself is important to recognize, that I'm sure a lot of melee would feel the opposite if they went into range, that it would suddenly be really odd to them, because it provides a different set of challenges, I think, when you're in range, certainly around things like completing your spell casts, executing your rotation with minor movements, and making efficient your positioning so that you can do that, which melee doesn't really have to worry about so much. But the sheer amount of chaos that ensues and next to that boss model, and sometimes some of the bigger boss models that and mob models that literally hide ground effects and swirlies and things. I mean, I died underneath a slug yesterday, which was I consider a low point in my, WoW career so far. And it, because I couldn't see anything under Brood Twister's body. So, for sure, I think there's challenges to all of it. I definitely find melee harder. I'm interested in what Brox thinks, because obviously with the Frost DK perspective. But
of course,
for me, I'm with you. The overview of the battlefield and being able to sort of see everything that's going on is something that I've always known and find very difficult to let go of.
I feel like I'm cheating. I feel like I'm playing the game on easy mode. Brox, I'll just say one thing before we move to Brox. Declan, we'll have old listeners of this show will laugh at this one, and I'll trigger everyone a little bit as well by saying thank you so much, Declan, for pronouncing melee the correct way. I really appreciate that. And everyone who pronounces it differently can go and get triggered and let me know in the Discord about that one.
What do they say?
Oh, they say melee, they say melee, all this crazy stuff. They're crazy. Brox, mate, what's your feelings on Mythic Plus as a melee character so far this season? Like I say, I'm yet to do it, but I'm sort of sitting there going like, I mean, I can dodge swirlies easy enough, but I feel like I would catch strays from frontals all the time. Is it brutal?
I wouldn't say it's brutal, but pros and cons. There's pros and cons to both. Being in ranged, you do have a little bit more, I guess, comfort might be the word, in your survivability. But when there are things that you need to move away from, it's going to affect your cast. Whereas in melee,
right. You don't have to say it our way. It's all good, mate. Listen to your heart.
You do have to dodge some, swirlies and everything. But the biggest thing about being in the thick of it is trying to stay behind the boss because of, can't remember what it's called now. Anyway, yeah.
So the parry and dodge.
Yeah. So you got to stay behind the boss. So it depends on the tank movement as to whether or not you're going to be able to, do good DPS. And the other thing is you can, you've got your auto attack, so you can keep doing damage while you're moving. So there is obviously the higher chance of being hit by things, and you do kind of have to be a bit more mobile to some extent. But pros and cons.
Very good. As your guildies cheer you on to chug your drink, Declan, let's come back to you, mate, and say, so back to the numbers that we were talking about just then with Ele Shaman. It's great to hear that Blizzard took their foot off the gas a little bit with the nerfs that were incoming. Having heard what you've heard, and feel free to drop whatever numbers you want to drop, do you feel that they've wound up in the right postcode of where you should have been knocked back to, or not?
They're close. They're close. Our performance in M+ and our AoE damage is good now. It's in a good place. And I think it would be very hard to argue otherwise based on the data that we can see. Our single target took an unnecessary hit, which was the concern to begin with. So to give you an idea of the numbers that we saw, what we thought we would see and what ended up happening, we were looking at a 24% nerf, which is, I mean, when you say it, that's a quarter of our damage. We say it like that, that's just absurd, right? It just sounds insane to me. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. But that got brought down to closer to 11%, sort of between 9 and 12%, depending on what you're doing. Most of that actually was not their nerfs, it was a fix to a bug. Right. We had a bug with our Ascension where we fired off an awful lot of overloads of our lava burst and also a load of flame shocks onto one target. It was almost like it was trying to replicate what we should do on 6 targets and condense it all onto one. It's very strange. And that actually was giving us a huge damage burst when we pressed our Ascension and providing us with an enormous amount of our resource maelstrom to then spend on really hard-hitting spells in our Ascendant's cooldown. So we were getting an enormous amount. I think that was calculated to be between 7 and 9% of our damage lost just from that bug fix. So yes, to answer your question, we're not in a terrible place. This is definitely not disaster 101. Everyone will quickly leave elemental. We're competitive in M+, and in single target we are low, and we need to be tuned further. But we're not down and out by any means. I just wish they had fixed the bugs and then considered the tuning.
Well,
It's really strange to me to not do that.
I agree with you. And on that note, if we can sort of dive a bit deeper on the tangent of QA that you raised in your post. And this is something that
Sure.
Blizzard, I want to say it's a sensitive topic, only in that, look, knowing devs from Blizzard and interviewing devs from Blizzard over the years and sort of, feeling the pulse of what goes on social media and everything, I understand that the company is it's not unique to Blizzard that the company is protective of their own. I understand that. Game devs are human. Everyone makes mistakes. They're doing their best. We get it. Blizzard does tend to get particularly defensive and prickly when it comes to criticism of the QA team, I've noticed historically. And it's a tough one for the fans because we just don't have the information, or we don't know how the hot dog is made, if you will. So it's Blizzard would say that, the QA team comes under a lot of unfair criticism much of the time. However, I'm not sure who else at times the players are supposed to point the finger at when we don't know the whole story. So Blizzard will come out and say, like, how the hell did this number or this spell or this change or this boss make it past the gatekeeper of QA and into the hands of either players via a beta or a full-on live release? How did this happen? Like, surely there was a quality check that someone stood up and said, guys, what the fuck are we doing? This doesn't work. Now, there very well might be scenarios where the QA team, which we've known has been absolutely eviscerated by cost-cutting measures over at Blizzard in recent years. There might be instances where the QA team does stand up and say, hey, guys, this is fucking broken. We can't release this. And perhaps they're, not necessarily ignored, but overruled because you've got to push a product out, push a product out, adhere to release schedules, blah, 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 blah. There's a number of reasons of why, we can go easy on the QA team or it's not their fault. But, sorry, I'm trying to provide a rational setup to this question here, Declan. But they still leave us with plenty of reason to sit there and quizzically question the team as far as I'm concerned. Because we've seen this in Season of Discovery recently, Declan, where absolutely and there's two categorizations of what I'm talking about here, Declan, where there's baffling decisions in the eye of the, let's say, casual gamer, where even a casual gamer can log on who doesn't know fucking anything about the game and goes, oh, that's broken, versus the basement dweller who never sees the light of day, who plays way too much WoW, whose bar is set infinitely high, who says, how the fuck did this see the light of day? And we're talking about like 0.25%, change to, something that's way over the top. So I'm not talking about necessarily that crowd, but more the former crowd I was mentioning, where we've seen in Season of Discovery really basic stuff get released into the wild, into the hands of the players, where even the average players are going, I cannot believe in, like you say, a subscription-based game, that this got the green light and was handed to players to either abuse or just make their game not fun or broken. So I am this is a really long one, Declan, I'm so sorry, but I'm saying I'm very empathetic.
Go for it.
I'm very empathetic. I'm more empathetic to the devs than the majority of content creators. However, I have a line where I still say you're not immune from criticism. albeit constructive criticism, you're not fucking immune. And I think sometimes, I'm not pointing at Blizzard here specifically, but I think game devs in general try to throw that immunity or invisibility cloak on themselves and say, you don't ever get to criticize us for anything. This job is hard. Yeah, we agree the job is hard, but sometimes you still get the constructive criticism because you're not immune if fuck-ups make it through to the players. Anyway, that's the platform I'm setting there, Declan. My question is, having gone through all of that, when you initially saw the news, and this is, again, I'll take you back to a moment in time prior to them walking back the Nerf a little bit, thank God, like you said. When you first read these changes, your reaction was quite visceral in the post. You were passionate. I don't think you went over the top. I don't think you went too hard on devs, but you're clearly passionate and talking from a place of love for your class and everything when you went to the subreddit. And you mentioned QA a couple of times, and you sort of started to touch on the same things that I just mentioned, going, what are we doing with the QA team when this ridiculous overreaction is not run through the calculator and actually threatens to go live? Do you still kind of, I mean, obviously the changes they've made since might have changed your mind. Do you feel now that, I was, I preemptively got angry. Thank God they saw the light of day and eventually they did things the right way? Or do you sit there and question, well, why did we get here in the first place even?
No, my position is as solid as it was. I was, I suppose, as far as you can be, I was emotional about the changes they were making. And I stand by why. And it is, as you said, there's a lack of rationale certainly shared with us. And I think you're really correct to point out that we don't see it all. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors. We don't know the structure or the policies that are in place to support them through the process of releasing content. And, I'm not an idiot. And I'm certainly not so self-obsessed that I would think that I know it all and I've got all the answers. But what I will not accept is that I, amongst millions of others, am a paying customer on the regular for a multi-billion-dollar company that is posting record profits year on year, and you're going to tell me that my product is going to get worse over time, and that is what was going to happen. And I think that what captures that is the unreasonableness of it. Now, I talked a bit about data in my conversation on Reddit and the what we could see as players. I want to acknowledge that I don't have access to all the data that I'm sure Blizzard do. Certainly through like their telemetrics and stuff, I'm sure they get an awful lot of data that we just aren't privy to. And I'm sure they're looking for slightly different things than we're looking to. But what I think I was concerned by was that the community data that we have access to through Warcraft logs felt entirely irrelevant. And it shouldn't be irrelevant to their process if it is, because that is effectively how the community, certainly on the competitive level and the high-end sort of mythic level, that's how they judge how successful things are. So it's to their detriment, if no one else's, if they're choosing to ignore that data and use only their own. So that is really important to me, and my position will never change on that. That what I saw in those notes was a company that was maybe throwing numbers out, and as you said, at no point did there seem to be a discussion of how on earth did that even get past your calculator before someone said to you, why did it take the elemental community? I'm not a mathematician, I'm not fantastic with data, I'm not a coder, none of these are all way above my pay grade, and I have so much respect for all those people. Why on earth am I one of the people to speak up and say, I was literally me going, that number is off, like you're so far off with that number. I mean, if I can see it, how could they not see it?
I completely agree. And sorry, let me just jump in, Declan. this is probably not the case, but please don't get me wrong. I'm not in any way, shape, or form chastising you over the language that you used in your post. I thought you were in a great position. You're more than justified in, as you say, when you're paying the sub to ask those questions and raise those points. I'm with you all the way on this one. Sorry, I'm not going like, hey man, be nicer to game devs, blah blah blah. I think you raise a absolutely fantastic point right there, where it's like it kind of goes both ways. Where I get upset at the hyperbolic overreactions when, you know, so many, like I say, there's so many people out there who play way too much World of Warcraft, where it's so easy to sit in the bleachers and say things like, oh my God, look at these fucking idiots at Blizzard. Do they only employ idiots? Like, they're stupid. How could you possibly come to these decisions? And I'm always like, I guarantee you, like 99% of the people that work at that company are vastly more intelligent than you. But, we do get instances like this where you're right to say, guys, you're smart people. How did you get to this conclusion? Just show us the work. Show us how you got to this answer, because it is bizarre that, and this is not a shot at you, Declan, but I have to sort of do the jokey part here where you go like, when you've got the guy sitting in his undies in his living room that works the answer out and gets the word out on the street of like, hang on, this calculation is very wrong. That's upsetting and disturbing when these guys... I'm not saying, and again, Blizzard, please, if you're listening, don't get upset. I'm not saying you guys work very hard. You are paid, the right amount for your job. You're professionals and all that stuff. I'm not saying like, how do these guys earn their money and all that shit? That's dumb. I don't say that shit. But it is odd and awkward when the people who are being paid to look at this professionally 8 hours a day miss stuff like this, and the guy, at home, not getting paid for it, picks it up straight away. I hate seeing stuff like that. It boils my blood, but here we are, Declan.
For sure. And I go back to, I might have a very different view of this if I wasn't paying a subscription fee, but when, you're taking the equivalent of like, I'm going to show my age here. I was going to say 4 games a year, but it's nothing closer than that. It's more like 2 games a year, given the price of the games now. But, when you're taking that money from me each year, I don't think it's unreasonable of me to expect that there's a semblance of sensibility around what you're producing for me as a player of your game. And I think there's... my gut is that this is a symptom of the increased patch cadence that they've discussed through this War Within saga over the next 3 expansions, alongside all these other things that they're splitting off into. I mean, you mentioned Season of Discovery, another branch of WoW, classic WoW, vanilla WoW. We've got things like the Mists of Pandaria remix. They have got so many branches of WoW going out, and then they're also saying, and retail, we're going to start releasing things quicker, and we're going to hit you with more content. And I, on the face of it, got very excited about that announcement. But if that's going to come at the cost of quality, and if that's going to interfere, and I fail to see how it can't, because if you're telling me that for the last 10 years or however long, you've been releasing content slowly and you didn't need to, then I'd like a refund. I'm assuming that you were releasing at that speed because you needed to. So what's changed that you can now suddenly release so quickly? And I think the proof is in the pudding that maybe enough hasn't changed to allow them to release as quickly as they can. And as you sort of alluded to earlier, I think one of the questions I have is those cuts we saw to their QA team, how big of a deal is that? I don't blame anyone on the team, just as you don't, for the failure of a company. But if the structure is not there and the team is not there to properly QA this content, that's a failure of the company first and foremost, and the managerial hierarchy. That isn't necessarily a failure of the people down on the ground doing the work. So I'm really clear on that in my head. But yes, I do question whether they have left themselves short. to actually keep up with the cadence they want.
It's an interesting one, and I knew this would get you in, Parallax. Well, I'll throw it to you in 1 second, buddy. I just want to say this one last point. Well, not last point. We'll keep this conversation going, but I just want to throw in something interesting you said there, Declan, got me, because I don't play anymore. I've kind of quit, but I was a Final Fantasy 14 player as well on top of WoW. And they've kind of gone in the opposite direction. And this comes back to the kind of point around, game dev is hard, even though, I'm happy to give Blizzard shit where it's warranted, but also, try and stave off the crowd where that's warranted, that's holding the pitchforks and torches. Square Enix has gone in the opposite direction with Final Fantasy 14 of late, where they've sort of gone, look, we're going to slow down our patch cadence. We're actually going to give you content a little bit less frequently, guys. Please bear with us. We need more time, and we promise it'll be great quality content. Just let us go a bit slower. And the Final Fantasy 14 community is a very, very positive one. At first, they were like, oh, take all the time you need. You guys are the best, whatever. And that was about 2 years ago. And now they're kind of going, the murmurs, I feel, I've seen stories and stuff pop up just on the horizon recently of being like, is there enough, are we getting enough content? I feel a little bit bored, like things are coming out slower, there's not as much to do. And I've walked away from Final Fantasy 14 because I don't feel like there's as much to do. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, where Blizzard is pushing down on the accelerator and Square Enix is taking their foot off of it, and they're both getting criticized for it. You know what I mean?
For sure. Is that to me, or are you talking to Parallax?
Oh, just to anyone, whoever wants to jump in.
So I'll go really quickly, and then Parallax, I'm sure you're dying. I just want to say I definitely don't want to go back. I mean, I actually didn't play much, but I know Warlords of Draenor was an example of serious content drought, and I'm by no means suggesting we should ever go back to that. I just don't want a massive cascade of content that is so poorly QA'd that we are fighting bugs for weeks on end and actually not having a good time as a result, because that's not fun either.
Yeah. All right, Parallax, you've been listening in for an hour, casually playing along while maybe washing the dishes while you've got this running in the background. Now is your opportunity to stand up and say the thing you've been dying to say for the last hour, which is having a go at me about the Malay issue.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no pressure here. I kind of just wanted to chime in a little because I was listening to a lot of the rants you guys were going on. I was really enjoying it, but I wanted to say one thing that as a classic, this is a classic podcast after all, is remember where we came from. So like looking back at like throughout even just TBC Wrath in general, like we've had so many expansions where specs were doing double the amount of damage as other specs. And I think that gap has shrunk over time, continued to shrink over time. And you'll have little sort of, as the patches are coming out more frequently, you'll have little windows or little like kind of snippets where some specs for some reason or another just explode and then they get reeled back in. Just like right now, even if you were to look at Warcraft logs for the raid, Enhancement Shaman is only a few percentage points above Demo Warlock for like an entire run, 95th percentile. But every other spec is within like 1 or 2 points of score between each other. So I think the biggest kind of thing that I always think about when I think about balance, especially in retail, since it's constantly being tuned, is the difference between the specs is so much more determined by skill in retail than it is in Classic. Where there's a lot more buttons to press, the rotations are complex, there's a lot more mechanics to dodge, so where if you're messing up a mechanic, it can actually lower your damage because you're not optimizing your rotation as much. So a player with really high skill on a quote-unquote bad spec is still going to out DPS a person who's playing the absolute S-tier meta spec all the time. So I always feel like when you get into the Mythic, super high Mythic raid or super high Keystone territory, the difference between the specs becomes greater, and the difference between the skills is smaller, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Declan, does that resonate with you?
For sure. And I think, it is really important to recognize what Parallax said there about the journey the game's been on, and how much further we are closer to an actual balance than we have been in the past. I think we saw some real highs in Dragonflight. I said that before. I think we've seen a step backwards in the most recent patch. The other thing I do want to say that I think is really important is the context behind the data that we're looking at. I know you mentioned the Parallax. I think I heard you say 95th percentile. We have to be a little careful when we're starting to look at that sort of level of play, because actually what you're starting to see as well is situations where I don't want to use the word exploited, but where a damage profile can be taken advantage of. Can be. I want to say that it's a time where RNG plays a massive part. Sorry, in the value of the log. We do find typically, especially as you start to get to the 9900s, that you have to have good RNG to get there, whether it's good levels of crit, whether you've got enough procs, all these kind of things that play a part, whether you got targeted by many mechanics. And the second thing is whether the spec was leveraged in a group specifically to show off its strengths, can really be, I think, non-representative when it comes to the wider player base and what the rest of us are seeing. There was an example going on Wowhead during the first week. It was along the hysteria of what have they done, Elemental Shaman's insane, that moment. And it was I think it was a screenshot of an Olgrax Mythic kill where an Elemental Shaman had effectively done double of everyone else's damage. What they didn't tell you, and they wouldn't, because I doubt it would have garnered nearly as much attention, is that log involved their team effectively AFKing throughout the whole AoE phase to give this guy the biggest opportunity to do as much damage as he possibly could. Because he's a superstar and somebody who they all look up to and value as a team member, they wanted to give him that moment with the new spec. So I don't critique them at all, but it was taken really out of context of what we were actually seeing on the wider picture of raiding. And also, I think I believe it was it had been cut up into only selecting the AoE phases when they were showing his damage, not the actual duration of the whole fight. So there was just a few things there. I think when we get into the nitty gritty of data, and I say I'm not a mathematician, it's certainly not my specialty by any stretch, we do have to be aware of the context that underpins that data. And sometimes it can look more balanced or less balanced than it really is when we look at, the average person playing WoW at that level.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in that. I think we've seen different kind of different parts of that in different expansions too, because there's obviously there were some log exploits in China with DKs and things like that, and Wrath of the Lich King and stuff like that. So obviously, yeah, when you get to that upper echelon, there's some assumption there that maybe they were leaning really hard into certain specs to get them to perform better, which may sacrifice some damage from the rest of the raid, and maybe they didn't have a fast enough kill to get these other specs up. But yeah, a lot of those things are definitely things that you have to take into account. So good point.
Can I ask you guys, you mentioned, sorry, go for it. Who was that?
I just said thank you.
Oh, no worries.
Sorry.
No,
British politeness.
No, all good. It's a great contrast to my absolutely brutish Australianisms. Mates, look, if I can just ask about, we raised the point of bugs earlier, Declan, and this is for Parallax, Brox, Declan, whoever wants to jump in. We raised the concept of bugs earlier, and you said that part of the issue with shamans earlier was actually a bug. It wasn't all just numbers. There was something else going on in the inner machinations of the class that was unintended. Another thing, and this weaves back into the QA conversation as well, another thing that was popping up that I mentioned earlier was the shenanigans that was going on with Outlaw Rogue. Now, I don't believe any of you guys do play Rogue, but I'm sure that at some stage you saw what I'm talking about, and hopefully can speak about it much better than I ever could. But, people weren't just jumping up and down and hopping mad about Shaman. They were showing off all these, meters and logs with rogues going, what the fuck is going on with Outlaw Rogues? They were, 25, 30% above everyone else. It was getting just weird with the numbers that were being produced. I believe that something is coming or has already come in or is coming in to address this. Can you guys tell the listeners a bit more about that weird and wonderful week that rogues were going nuts, and what the story was and what's been done about it?
Sure, I can give a brief kind of rundown on
Go
what it
for
was.
it.
I don't play Rogue, but I kind of I saw kind of throughout the time that it was exploding. But essentially, there was some bug with the Outlaw hero talents where they could be in one spec. I may butcher this, I may not, but if I do, please correct me. They would be in one hero talent spec, and there was some ability that let them kind of stack up essentially a buff. And again, I don't know the specifics, but they were stacking up a buff, and then if they killed a critter, it triggered the buff, and they could switch hero talents, and then it would essentially allow them to just infinitely have max combo points over and over again and just spam finishers, I think is kind of what happened.
Was that your understanding, Declan?
Yeah, I'm a little ignorant. To be honest. I'd heard something about legacy content and multipliers and some strange things going on, but we didn't have an outlaw rogue in our guild, and I'd never played rogue, so I saw the data, but I couldn't tell you the machinations of it.
It was a very deliberate exploit to the point where now, like Josh said, they're rolling back runs that people did because the damage was so astronomical that people were killing raid bosses that they would have otherwise not been able to kill. They were completing mythic keystones in like record times, and it was just kind of fucking with the ladder. So we're in like cheating badly territory, and people were taking bans and things. So
it wasn't accidental. I think is important.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. You keep going.
There was nothing accidental about this. This felt like something you had to deliberately go and do to take advantage of. And like I said, although I don't know the ins and outs of the bug, I could see clearly in the data the impact it was having, and it was again something where you just go, well, in that case, maybe it's a disappointment on the player base, but also that it took a while to get fixed. It didn't just suddenly happen. It has been fixed, by the way, but it took a couple of days, for them to actually find out what was going on.
I thought it was a week or something before something was done, but I might be wrong.
It was I think it was close to 72 hours or something like that. Enough time for people to start their reset and just start clearing record time. High keys, like 17s and 18s at the time, I think.
If I can ask you guys about that one, I mean, how do you feel as players about that? Again, coming back to the conversation surrounding QA, but now also maybe throwing a bit of the spotlight and the, I don't want to say allegations is the wrong word, but more like, the scrutiny is the word I'm looking for on the player base themselves. There's something with rogues here in this instance that's so different from the shaman story where, harmless bug, with shaman, it's maybe not harmless, but it sucks, but it got taken care of. It wasn't game breaking. That's fine. It was just affecting their output. But then this thing with rogues comes along, and like you say, it's so niche, the criteria or conditions that you have to hit to trigger the bug to get access to this damage. I think back to comments I've heard from Blizzard devs over the years where they say things like, look, we could have 1,000 people on a QA team quality testing this game for 12 hours a day for months, and it'll take 2 hours in the hands of the 5 million players or whatever to discover something that we would have taken. Who knows if we ever would have discovered it? Do you know what I mean? So that is one of the challenges of QA work. But then you hear about the weirdness of this one, and I don't expect Blizzard to have found this, is what I'm saying. But once it was found, how do you guys feel? I think you kind of tipped your hat, Parallax. How do you feel about the players that then actively sought this form of gameplay out? I mean, I guess I'm asking you to play judge, jury, and executioner here. Do you feel that this is, hey man, if you didn't want us to fucking exploit it, you shouldn't have had it in the game. It's not my fault, man. And I did the condescending voice, but do you fall on the other side of the equation and go like Parallax alluded to, this isn't our first rodeo. We've been playing WoW for some time now, and the people who are exploiting this absolutely know what they're doing and what it's likely going to lead to. They shouldn't have gone down that garden path. Like, where do you fall on the argument? Is the player's fault or the dev's fault when you see stuff like this getting exploited?
Uh,
I'll say that,
I
Sorry,
I
go
think
go
it's
go
on the
Brox, and then
players.
we'll go Declan. Go for it, Brox.
Oh, thanks. I'd say it's definitely on the players. Like you said, they may not have caught this, or they clearly didn't catch it. But these kinds of bugs that are easily exploited to cause this much of an issue, um, exploiting it is definitely on the players. It's not, oh, this company's 20 years old, small indie company, etc., etc. All the memes. It's these things happen. I work for a business that the managing director is the one who fixes the bugs in the system, and there are still things that, I mean, he's a one man IT guy, but he's been running this business for 25 years, and he's still fixing bugs in his own system. So you know these things happen. It happens in coding and IT, and people taking advantage of that and then blaming Blizzard for it are just idiots. And you pretty much hit the nail on the head with what I was going to chime in about before. Is the quickest way to get their feedback is to release whatever it is they've got ready to release, and then if there is any issues, the player base will find it and help them fix it. Well, if they're positive players, they'll help them fix it. But then there's all the negativity that comes with it. That not that saying you guys are wrong. I completely agree with you that it would be nice to have a fine-tuned release of every single patch, but it's just not the reality of it, especially in this day and age with early access games and all that kind of stuff, where you are literally the beta tester for 6 to 12 months in some instances.
Well, this is sorry if I can jump in there, Brox, and just say this is the point where you would get the pushback from people, where I kind of sit in the, like I've said, I've sort of sit in the halfway point between the two hyperbolic camps in a way, where but a hyperbolic World of Warcraft player would say to you right now, "Hey Brox, shut up, man. I pay a fee. Sorry for asking for a fucking high quality product for my fee, man." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and look, that's their opinion, but what can you do? Like, there's so many of us out there that have different opinions on the matter, and we're all paying customers, we're all in the same boat, but it's just a matter of that's their personality, and that's how offended they get when they don't get their way. It's I guess some sort of maybe not entitlement, but that might be a bit too much of a harsh word, but
no, I hear you. I hear you, Declan. I'll throw it over to you and just sort of add what I'm getting at. I mean, you can hear what I'm getting at with this, but like, I don't want to. I don't want to make it sound like as I often say on the show crudely, I don't want to make it sound like I've got my tongue surgically attached to the asshole of the Blizzard devs, but I do like sort of go the other way at times in terms of I do lash out at gamers that I feel are unfairly critical at times. And if there are players saying, "Oh, these poor old rogues, won't somebody think of the rogues who were just innocently playing the game and then they find themselves, unfairly in the spotlight and being called cheaters for just playing the game?" And it's kind of like the whole, I come back to why I give Blizzard a break on a bug like this being in the game is I sort of use the analogy of fast food at times where I'm like, yeah, McDonald's is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, whatever, and I'm paying for their product, and I do expect, the level of quality or whatever that I come to expect from McDonald's. You can sort of laugh at that. But when I go to McDonald's at the drive-thru and I order what I order and I get home and I see that they got one of the burgers wrong, I don't go, "That's it. I'm never going to McDonald's again. What a fucking ridiculous company. How fucking stupid do you have to be to get a drive-through order right? This is unacceptable. I'm a paying customer." Like, you just kind of go, "Oh, that sucks," and shrug it off. And I guess people make mistakes, so hopefully it'll be better next time. That's just my personal take on things. And I kind of carry that over to Blizzard, where it's like, look, I am a paying customer, and yes, I absolutely expect decent QA, and I expect a fucking, pretty good product coming my way. But if mistakes get made or things get missed, but are then corrected soon after the fact, I don't lose my shit. So that's kind of, again, the setup for this conversation around rogues, where I'm like, I don't blame for Blizzard for this one personally, but I would throw shade at anyone out there, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I've seen boatloads of these comments, but I would throw shade because I've seen them in regards to other exploits in the past, at the dickheads who go like, sorry for playing the game, man. It's not my fault you guys can't fix your shit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm firmly in the camp of bugs will happen. The most unintended interactions will happen. It's normally quite clear cut as to whether you should or shouldn't do it. There's that old saying that goes around, exploit early, exploit often, because you know it's going to get fixed. And, you know, we've seen in the past suspensions and people's even bans, you know, off of the back of those sorts of things. I've got no problem with saying to the player base on that issue, the Outlaw issue, for example, you know, you failed there because what you did is you made a mockery really of content that people are trying to enjoy on a competitive level, and you went and clowned over it with an exploitation that you knew you shouldn't have done, and that I think cheapens it for everyone, and it spoils the fun of those sort of low level competitions that we see, whether it's, you know, on a server and you're competing for server first, or, you know, you're looking at the alliance horde split, or anything, you know, US, EU. It's not just about raid world first, you know, it's not just about liquid method and echo, it's about all of us participating in that content, and I think they made a mockery of that when they did what they did with those exploits, and I think that's a very separate issue to the one that I took them to task on in my Reddit post, if I may say so.
Fair enough. I'll just end on this, Parallax, and just sort of say, like, you know, it really comes down to, as far as exploits go in the game and the kind of exploits that realistically could attract action on Blizzard's behalf against the player doing said exploit. It's obviously funny coming from me as, you know, a former criminal prosecutor, you know, long-time lawyer, sort of talking about the vagueness of the rules, but realistically, the joke is it's very much so like the old, you know, in the US, the courts, what's the famous court's definition of pornography is, you know, I couldn't tell you what it is, but I'll know it when I see it. And it's the same with exploits that would attract a ban, you know, and like players are obviously, you know, get bent out of shape when what the rules aren't explicitly or specifically written down so that they can then point to them and tell you whether or not they were breaking them. But I mean, this isn't real life. It's not that we need the legislation written down in plain or not so plain English for everyone to see to know whether or not they're breaking the law. It's a fucking video game. It's okay for it to be vague, and you've been playing long enough to know in your guts if you're probably doing some badness. That's just how I feel about it. How do you feel, Parallax? Is that a decent summary?
Yeah, you actually beat me to it. I was going to say something snide about being a former criminal prosecutor. But, yeah, it's so obvious to most people when you're doing something that can potentially get you banned. I mean, you're cheating the game. You're doing something. You're going out of your way to like exploit something that you would have not been nowhere near able to stumble upon. It kind of makes me question how people even find these bugs, because, like, I know, you know, like Brock's alluded to and people have said in the past, like every piece of software you've ever used has bugs. And it's to what extent is that bug like breaking your ability to use the software? You know, in a game, it's easy to tell when I do something that I'm getting one over on everybody else if I'm competing against them, or I'm getting one over on the devs for leaving it in the game and I think I'm going to get away with something, but I don't know. It's obvious. People do it because they probably don't care if they get banned or not. I don't know. I just feel like it's fun for them to see their name at the top of the ladder. They feel like they got over on them, and then they live with the consequences and then do it again next time.
Parallax, if I can keep you going, if you've got the time, mate, I just want to ask, we'd been grilling Declan about his beloved Shaman and the patch notes of 11.0.5. I think we've already started to see stuff getting data mined for 11.0.7 as well, coming relatively soon to a PTR near you, I believe. Parallax, you've been playing a lot of Paladin. Tell me how you're feeling about your class maybe at launch, through the 11.0.5 notes, and just in general so far. Good, bad, ugly, what's going on?
Yeah, it started off really bad, but I'm loving Prot right now. So I kind of always gravitate towards Prot Pally because I like playing tank in general. But I like Prot because I have all the utility. Like I feel like I have something to answer everything. Like I have an emergency top off heal, I have an immunity, I have a silences, I have range interrupts, I have magic immunes, all this other stuff. But at the beginning of the expansion, it was very like you felt like you were left off the cool kids table at lunch. Like everybody had awesome new toys, and you were just sitting there with like, I don't know, like Lightsmith was just a random little bubble shield that kind of helps you, but it doesn't really do anything. And all the talents in between the capstone for Lightsmith just didn't really feel like they were helping. I don't know. It just was very boring. It didn't feel Paladin-y. And then Templar is just like one of your main defensives. Eye of Tyr turns into a giant hammer, and you do a big burst of AoE for a second. And
it's one of my favorite abilities in War Within.
Yeah, I mean, it looks cool and it feels massive because you pull out this massive dick and just slap everybody with it.
It's real hard, yeah.
But the problem with it is it just didn't feel impactful. Like it didn't feel like it was changing your character at all, and I don't know. So I can't actually. One of the negatives, I don't spend like a ton of time researching, the talent trees and things like that. I think the new talents are very complex. Like most people probably just import talent builds because it's really hard to find like your own build, in my opinion. But the way they change the talents now makes it so I feel tanky. I feel like I'm doing a ton of damage all of a sudden. There's some new kind of interactions with shielding your allies with the Lightsmith hero talent ability. So the Holy Bulwark. So there's like some overhealing happening and protections and stuff. So I don't know. Without going too rambly here, I just feel like they put the class back to where it felt at the end of Dragonflight. You have lots of utility. You're tanky. You heal a lot. You damage a lot. It's fun. GG.
I want to come back to that. I'm not done with you and Paladins. You've said something that makes me want to raise this with Declan and Brox, just in terms of picking non-meta talents and the difficulties you've been having with kind of maybe moving away from the cookie cutter build suggestions and just doing your own thing. I've been really enjoying. I get the best of both worlds. I'll happily look at a guide, but I also have no drama whatsoever doing my own thing if that's what I choose. I'm not trying to be the best player in the world. I just do what's fucking fun, and that's how I like to play the game. It is always fun though when I spot within the talent trees of the War Within for whatever. I've tried almost every fucking class at this point. Not every spec, but I've tried every class for a significant period of time. I love finding a talent that, you look up what people take in Mythic Plus generally. And when I'm building my build, you see a talent and you go, whoa, 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 why does nobody take that one? That sounds awesome. And I'll give you a good example. I'd love to hear from you guys if you feel there are talents that with the classes that you've played that maybe are slept on a little bit. And by all means, tell me if I'm an idiot for saying this, but Declan, over to your beloved Shaman. I was looking at Resto Shaman just the other day. I'm getting one up and running. And I saw that, again, a guide's just a guide. It's literally just, I always say, and I say this as a fucking content creator, self-loathing content creator. Content creators and guide writers are literally just some dude. They are not the god of fucking gaming. It's just some fucking guy in his undies at home telling you what he thinks. They're not special. So, you take that information with a grain of salt at all times. Now, having said that, sure, much of the time they might be right. But anyway, I'm not saying what I'm about to say to you is wrong. I just found it interesting. Declan, I saw in the Shaman talent tree that one that gives you a 15 and 30% 2x stacking bonus to damage reduction to a school of magic if you use wind shear on them while casting. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah. In the bottom right of our class tree.
That's right. I found that super duper interesting. And I'm like, wow, that sounds super helpful in Mythic Plus. And then I looked up the guide and they're like, oh, don't take that one. And I'm like, fuck you. I want to take that one. I feel like if I was in a busy pack and there's, unblockable AoE fire damage going out, and I can be like, if I just interrupt one of those fire spells, then I'm golden here. I don't know. I just feel like that would be really cool. Do you feel like there are talents that you love that others don't like that?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, on the context of that one in particular, if I could just comment on that first, is I think the reason that maybe is ignored is because for a lot of, again, I suppose when you're looking at a guide, you're looking at people saying this is how you can play best. And when we consider how you can play best, we're hoping that all the interrupts go through and you don't take damage from that school of magic. So I can sort of see the argument there. They're saying, don't worry about it, because if you've interrupted it and everyone else also does their interrupts, you shouldn't take that damage. So you don't need to have a reduction to it. But, you know, I like that talent as it happens. That's one of my favorites as well. I think it incentivizes
there's so much
interrupting and using your
there's so much
utility.
unstoppable AoE that goes out. That's what bothers me.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, some of it is the same school and some of it isn't. So you're absolutely right. There's definitely context where I think that's valuable. I think also as well, speaking from an elemental perspective, we had our defensiveness gutted at 1105, along with that cooldown reduction that I talked about before. That when that went, our defensiveness took a massive hit because we were no longer cycling through our cooldowns really quickly to defend ourselves. So there might be more use case for that now than there was when we could have our defensives up so regularly. I think in terms of talents that I really love, I am thrilled that I'm able, I mean, this is not an unpopular talent, but I'm personally just thrilled to have a button to press that increases my DPS now. We were such a flat damage spec. I'm so pleased I get to use Ascendance again, and that they gave it some visual love and a little bit of customization. I'd love for them to go even further with that and lean into that, and maybe make it a little bit like the Druid forms, where you can go to the barber and actually play around with the skins and coloring and stuff. I would love to see more of that to give it more sort of a thematic relevance. But I love that we get to press that again, and that's actually an impactful and interesting ability to use. And I think that was sorely missing before. But if I'm honest, I'm in that slightly sort of glazed eyes part of post-patch where I'm just enjoying all of the changes that, and actually a lot of the talents are being used that I'm not necessarily thinking there's anything that I love that everyone else hates, because we're all trying things out at the moment. And if you went onto the Ele Discord today, you'd see builds still being tested and checked and going, oh, does this work actually? Should we try this? The only thing that's been completely ignored at the moment is anything to do with our elemental summons, which are massively undertuned. So there's like sort of 2 or 3 talents which are really disappointing there. But I'd love for them to be amazing, but they're not amazing and they're not worth taking ever at the moment.
Okay. Brox, mate, you've got to run soon. Anything on DK there? Were the talents that you love that you feel don't get enough love, or what's your one you always love to look at, or do you build your own builds, or do you just follow the guides?
I don't get to play too much, so you know, I don't really have a lot of time to investigate too much research into my build. So I do tend to just import based on what current content I'm doing. But regarding specific talents that I really enjoy, you know, the crowd controllability of DK as a tank is just amazing. Being able to, you know,
the blinding sleet, is it?
Yeah, blinding sleet. And all the AoE grips, the Gorfiend's Grasp, even just a simple, you know, Death Grip. Just having that control over the battlefield and being able to bring them to you is just fantastic. I think that's what I'm really enjoying about Blood Tank at the moment. I don't mind the Deathbringer hero talents. It's a bit simple. It's literally just put debuff on target, wait for stacks to go up, and then it goes boom. I kind of really, when the expansion was announced and they had the hero talents all, you know, laid out for you to have a look at when they were brand new and shiny, I was really hoping for more fantasy around the Sanlean, you know, Blood DK, vampiric kind of fantasy, but it's really only viable according to the websites as a raid main tank.
Well, have you spotted what might be coming down the pipeline for you in 11.0.7?
No, not yet.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I feel like DK got a fair bit of love in what's proposed to be coming, like Unholy and Blood. I saw a lot of like 9 and 10% buffs to abilities.
Oh, nice. That'll be good. I mean, the damage profile is still pretty good. I think I was in I can't remember if it was a heroic or a mythic +2 the other day, and I was second on damage. So either I was doing really, really well, or the DPS was bad. But I don't know. But yeah.
No, I remember seeing
I'm running
Heart Strike, Death Strike, Blood Boil. A lot of the core stuff was going up.
No, it's good to hear. But yeah, currently I'm really enjoying it. The Deathbringer hero talents are fun, good damage. The once you hit a certain, I can't remember what the criteria is for the proc, but once you get the specific proc, then your Marrow Rend creates 2 big frost sights to come down and do big AoE damage.
Such a good sound effect and look. They nailed that one.
Yeah, so that's pretty satisfying when that comes up. But yeah, really, I guess the one gripe I have is with how tanky Guardian Druids and Protection Warriors have been since the start of the expansion. Some healers kind of get a bit comfortable in their DPS rotation and kind of, I don't know, forget that a DK can, have a bit of a yo-yo effect depending on his the start of the battle. For example, if you're about to pull an AoE pack, if you haven't got your Marrow Rend stacks up or whatever, or you don't have enough runic power, you've pretty much got no defense. So they need to be ready for the health to yo-yo until I get some runic power and then be able to heal myself. So, some healers tend to just forget about that. So it can be a bit scary at times. But once we've got those Marrow Rend stacks up and plenty of runic power, we're pretty much unkillable solo. So that is very exciting. And I did experience that recently in a Mythic 2 on the last boss. The whole team died. I had 5% to go and I soloed the rest of it. It was fantastic. The heart was pounding, but it was so much fun. I mean, given it was only a +2, but it was still, that's where I'm at currently in, my adventure. So
mate, we've run a couple. We've run a couple.
Higher, I assure you. It goes like we've had. Just to cut in, we've got a blood DK in our guild, and we've had him solo raid bosses for us before for the last few percent in previous matches. It happens.
It's such a thrill.
It actually happened in the Race to World First at the end of Shadowlands too. Liquid Scott soloed one of the raid bosses Anduin from 5% to 0 by himself on a blood DK, which is wild.
It's a very fun class. But yeah, we've run a couple of Mythics already, Brock, so we'll have to get some more under our belt. And I'm always happy to do fucking whatever, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't give a shit. Mate,
the other thing I was going to say, just before I go, you touched on it earlier about hugging Mythics, and it's always better to run. People's opinions on it's always better to run with friends. I have only just returned to retail, so I'm trying to build up that pool, and that's why I'm part of your community now. And it's really good that when we can, but there are certain times where it's just not possible to run with friends because it's just like organizing a raid team.
Different schedules, yeah.
It's just difficult. So while I agree that it's better, and people hugging and bricking keys really sucks. Sometimes that's our only option. So
I'm with you, mate. I'm with you. That's why I lose my mind. People aren't wrong to say this, but there's so much more to the point. I lose my fucking mind whenever you raise an issue you're having in game with groups or whatever, and people are like, just join a guild, you fucking idiot, or what? Just find some friends. I'm like, mate, real life and schedules are a thing. I've got 5 great IRL friends that play WoW. I can't just click my fucking fingers and it's Avengers Assemble and we're all online at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would be nice if it was that easy, but it's definitely not. So anyway, I do have to shoot off. Thanks for having me, and if anyone from the community wants a tank, hit me up.
Too easy. Thanks for joining, mate. We'll catch you later. Any shout outs before we let you go?
No, mate, just a shout out to you.
Oh, stop
community,
it.
What you do, it's fantastic.
All right. Thanks, mate. We'll talk to you later.
See you guys.
Declan,
it's nice to speak to you.
Have a good one, Brox. Declan, I want to bring it back to you for a quick one. Parallax, I want to prod you more on Paladins, and we'll start to wind it up. Declan, don't worry, I won't keep you too much longer. Mate, I hope, Declan, we'll check in with you. We'll do a welfare check, Declan. Is this going easier or better than you thought it would at this point?
I feel about as sweaty and disgusting as I do towards the end of teaching a lesson, which is, that happens. It's every time. It never gets easier. It never gets easier talking to people because people have lots to say and you have to listen really carefully to respond, and I suck at that. So
No, man, I meant to.
no, but you've made it very pleasant. You've gone very easy on me.
I should have said it earlier. I should have encouraged you and let you know, because I mean this. I'm not just saying it to blow smoke up your ass. You're absolutely smashing it. I've really been hanging off of your every word, and you're doing very well. So thank you so much again for doing this,
thank
mate.
you.
I just want to ask you, you mentioned earlier mages, hunters, warriors. Who do you feel, and because I want to also bring sort of the ride of the Holy Paladin into the mix, which you did, I believe, mention in your post. Who do you feel has had the wildest ride balancing-wise thus far through War Within? Just up and down and yo-yos and dips and peaks and valleys and everything.
I mean, the immediate one that comes to my mind, I don't know if the data will back me up on this, but the one that comes to my mind is Fire Mage. They have been literally bottom of the table, then top of the table, then bugged, then fixed and mid of the table, then they were top again. Now I think they've dropped right to bottom by a huge percentage. They do not seem to have a clue what they are doing with Fire Mage. My mages, we've got 3 in our guild. And they just don't know where to go. In fact, I think one of them just said, "Do you know what? I'm just going to stay with Arcane, not because it's my favorite, but because, frankly, the other 2 specs just seem to be anywhere but reliable right now." Although I will say, and I have to say this because otherwise I'll get shouted at later. Frost Mage is looking really fantastic after its mini rework. I wouldn't even call it a rework, just a few changes.
Right.
They've really sort of nailed down what they want for Frost. It looks really strong and really good to play, but Fire is a mess.
Now, it's funny because I invoked the name of the Holy Paladin, and it was just one of those things where I've no doubt Fire Mage is if what you say is absolutely the way it's been, that does sound pretty wild. But I mean, I remember like a month ago, was it 3 or 4 weeks ago, when Holy Paladins were going to get nerfed. They hit the fucking roof. They walked it back, just like they did with your beloved Shaman recently. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that they're even buffing them in 11.0.5. And I'm like, wait, they were just going to nerf these guys a couple of weeks ago. Now they're buffing them. Like, what, do they know what they're doing with the Holy Paladin? It seems bizarre as well.
Well, and no, I think you've said it exactly right. It was, again, baseless. This is the bit that gets me and sort of made me angry enough to make the post in the first place. Is I couldn't see a reason in data that I can see, and for those less initiated with Warcraft logs, it's fairly comprehensive. You can see the breakdown of each individual player in a team. You can see exactly what they're casting and when. You can get replays of their movement across that. You can see their casts per minute. You can look at you can just look at everything, the buffs and debuffs they were receiving. This is comprehensive data, right? And it's used for guilds to properly analyze on a competitive level when people are doing things correctly and incorrectly. And there was just no proof in this data for that Holy Paladin nerf. And I think the thing that signified maybe to Blizzard, I don't know, I'm theorizing here, is that it was so off base, is that it wasn't just Holy Paladins that were exasperated by the change. I mean, if you look down the Wowhead comments, they're like, what? Why are you nerfing Holy Paladins? They're fine. Like the general community, those not playing Holy Paladin, looked at that and went, I think you've got the wrong healer. I think people were maybe expecting that of Shaman, to be honest. And again,
they're ratting out the other guy. Look at the Resto Shaman.
I genuinely think everyone was like, what, you're nerfing Holy Paladin when Resto Shaman's here? Like, what are you doing? And, we talked about it earlier, that the throughput of Resto Shaman wasn't the problem, and it's a lot more nuanced than that in terms of dungeon design and everything else. But the fact that you have this Resto Shaman in that position and then they nerf Holy Paladin, it was just really strange and confusing. And they walked it back, and then not only did they walk it back, but they then buffed them. And that was the concern for them, was always their M+. their relevance in raid, I think they'll always have a place in raid because they bring a lot of mitigation and damage reduction in the form of aura mastery. But the concern was that in M+ they were genuinely struggling to get through some of the damage profiles, and also the sheer frequency of the damage profile required. They just didn't have the buttons to press, and so that nerf was in the context of Holy Paladins actually having a pretty rough M+ season, and it was not a nerf to their raid healing at all. It was just a nerf to all their healing. Again, it was, I suppose, in some ways mirrored the Shaman concerns I had, that they were concerned about our AoE burst, so they nerfed our single target by a quarter. It was just, excuse me, sorry, so confusing. And I think, when they then rolled that back, if I remember correctly, they then buffed their M+ performance to compensate, because they realised that actually not only did they not need a nerf, but actually they needed some help in M+. And look, I think it's important when we are having this conversation to acknowledge that Blizzard are doing the right thing when they walk back on these. I don't ever want to be in a position where the dev team or whoever's making these shot calls feels that they can't go back because they have to save face or look like they're being a consistent company. They are doing the right thing when they walk back these nerfs and when they go, actually, we've heard you, we looked at it a bit deeper and we've decided we're not going to. I just wish that there was less of that happening right now. And, once in a blue moon, having to walk back a nerf is one thing, but it's becoming quite regular.
Yeah.
And I think that's where they're starting to look, for lack of a better term, it looks a little unprofessional, frankly. Yeah. And I think we have to recognize that it's good to walk back and go, actually, I made a mistake here, we need to change this. It's good that they didn't just keep going with what they were going to do to Elemental Shaman, because we would have literally been in the bin this week. I'm very grateful that they're open-minded to that, but please do it a bit less, because this is madness.
You're right to call out the sort of prevalence that it started to pick up with, what I would call almost less. It's like a PR check. Like, they announce these changes, then they lob the grenade into the crowd of players, and if there's no backlash, they go, sweet, green light it. But then they brace, and if there is backlash, they go, oh, okay, you got us, we'll change it. It's becoming more and more prevalent, and it is odd. Parallax, I'll throw it back to you, buddy, and we'll start to wind it up here. I just want to ask you, you mentioned earlier with your Prot Paladin, you're feeling pretty good about it. They did bring in some pretty significant changes a couple of weeks ago. It's feeling better. I just wonder if you saw someone put up a fun little meme on the subreddit 24 or 48 hours ago about sort of, basically ranking the tanks in terms of how much you need to worry about them. It's funny because I was healing a Prot Paladin yesterday, and I mean, you never know what's going on. It's also, player, it's dependent on the player and not just the class at times as well. But my God, the Prot Paladin's health was yo-yoing like he was a fucking blood DK. And I was like, what is going on here? It's literally 120, 120. And I know they have the self-heal and everything, but I just hadn't seen that wild of a roller coaster ride with a Prot Paladin before. And I think it came back to the meme of people saying actually Prot Paladins are very stressful to heal. I would love to get some more consistency back to the class so that it doesn't perform like a blood DK. But has that been your experience so far, or has it gotten more solid recently?
No, it feels way more forgiving than it has in the past. I did see that post, by the way, and I wasn't surprised I saw Prot Pally at the top, because I feel like they've sort of enhanced their passive defensives. The parry chances. You get more stats too. You get more crit, or you get more mastery. Well, the crit actually helps you all the time because it increases your parry. Mastery only helps you if you're in your consecration, and it increases your chance to block. But I don't know. I think that you have to play perfectly. Early on, you had to play perfectly to be tanky. So any amount of stepping out of your consecration, if the buff drops, or if you Shield of the Righteous drops for a second, you're super vulnerable. Whereas now, I can't say, I don't have the data to back it up, but I do say it feels a lot safer. So I bet you're probably playing with somebody who was just sort of not necessarily keeping up good uptime on other
Right.
buffs. The other tanks, the same can be said, so they all kind of have that mechanic.
So do you feel that, because there were a lot of comments in that thread going like, couldn't help but notice where you placed Prot Paladin. I think that should be a little lower down the tier list. Do you think a lot of those comments might have been based in biases from before the fix?
Probably, yeah. I think it's just like a perception thing. It takes a while for perceptions to be corrected, but I mean, everyone knows Warrior's super tanky because they have really good passive defensives, right? They have block all the time, and they have shield block, which lasts forever. It can be up all the time. And then they have ignore pain, which is just a constant shield. They're just always refreshing on themselves. So, I mean, that's easy to know. A paladin, you know, if you're kiting around, you have to stand still in your consecration to be tanky, right? But in Mythic Plus and shit, like you're moving around a lot, and you know, they made a change to help that. But
All right.
yeah.
Guys, we'll wind it up here. Declan, I've got one last question for you, then we'll finish up. It's a big one. Mate, I'll just say, look, we've said a lot over the last 2 hours, and again, thank you so much for your time and patience and for saying yes to coming on the show. But if I were to throw you the dev hat, Declan, and say, congratulations, Declan, we've just hired you. We've heard everything you've had to say about Elemental Shaman today. You sound brilliant. You know the class inside and out. You are now in charge of designing this class. Hope you accept the job. What are your hopes and dreams for Shaman throughout the rest of the War Within? What would you change build-wise, development-wise, talent-wise, whatever, to make this class your dream class? And, you know, not to say that the devs are doing a bad job, but if you were given the wheel, what would the class look like? And
Ooh, that is a huge question.
As specific as you like, mate. Go deep.
I have to admit, I don't even need to, it's not, admit's the wrong word. I have to recognize, and I think I said it early on, I am thrilled with a lot of the changes that have already just happened. I think they are absolutely going in the right direction with Elemental Shaman, particularly around the balance of the elements and us actually using all of those elements to sort of buff each other. And it's not quite weaving, but there's elements of that in there where one element will buff another element. And I love that, and I think I'd love to see that built upon more. As it stands at the moment, we have some issues around Frost Shock being fairly useless, even though it shine. I think we're having quite a good conversation on the Ele Discord earlier about how important it is that procs and, you know, flashing up on your bar and stuff, how important it is that those are actually DPS increases or not, and whether that's that sort of intuition of, oh, it's flashing, I'll press it, whether that should reward you or not. Because at the moment, Frost Shock will light up. You should ignore it unless you're moving and you've got nothing else to press. So, I mean, I don't know quite where I sit on that, but I guess I would like to see Frost Shock as a spell be used more, because I think the Frost side of our profile is not quite there. I'd love to see more representation of all the elements. Excuse me, I'm recovering from COVID a little bit, so I'm a bit coughy suddenly. Oh, good. You've made me talk too much.
Oh, I feel awful.
The other side of it, so you should, Josh, so you should. The other side of it is they did this whole thing, maybe some people remember this, where they suddenly went, Elemental Shaman use lightning spells, and actually that's a real identity that doesn't exist in the game. We really want to build on that. Here's the Stormbringer hero talent tree, and what I felt problematic with that was that actually, if you look at what our lightning profile is, it's just lightning bolt and chain lightning, and there's no other spells. I would have loved to see that fleshed out a bit, maybe in terms of lightning lasso in the class tree becoming part of the rotation,
right?
Yeah.
Would you go as far as adding another lightning spell, or does Shaman already have way too many buttons?
I know. I need to think about that, really, because if I did that, you know, this is why I'm not because I'd be like, have 100 buttons to press. Let's go. I think of all these really cool spells, and I go, yeah, perfect.
Can I tell you, as someone who has just started playing every class and is only new to retail, Shaman is probably the chief offender of too many buttons for me personally, along with DK.
It is hotkey central, especially with all the utility. What you have to remember is a lot of the utility isn't used very often, so you start to learn the bits that are really important. The other thing that I think is not quite fleshed out is our summons. I say there's probably, off the top of my head, 3 or 4 talents dedicated to our elemental summons, and they're really so undertuned that they're just irrelevant. And I think it's really disappointing that you've got this sort of 2.5 minute cooldown. Traditionally, that's quite a big cooldown actually, and you'd expect to press that and get some real reward from it. And it's something like under 5% of our damage. You know, it's nothing. They're so rubbish. The age of Meatball must end. Yes.
I know you got to finish the quote. Yeah.
Yeah, and the age of massive god Thundercock must begin. I'm not sure. I don't know about Thundercock. I'm not completely against Stormkeeper shaping our chain lightning into a cock. That's fine. I can get behind that. So yeah, sure. We'll make that one of my edicts upon high if I'm a dev at any point. But do you know? No, Lightning Lasso. You said earlier, what's an underrated talent or a talent that you really think people don't appreciate enough? It's such a fucking cool spell. You can move whilst channeling it. It looks really cool. It holds the target in place. It's such a great spell, and we just don't. It's not usable, and it's a fully PvP talent. That's all it is. It doesn't have any value in PvE at all. So that's up there. Whether that could become a penis of some sort, I don't know, but.
Very good.
If I'm not slapping somebody with a penis in this game, what are we even doing?
All you soundboard enthusiasts, I look forward if anyone's going to dive into Declan saying in his incredibly elegant accent, I don't know about Thundercock. Well said.
That's the last word that I ever said in public. Thanks, everyone.
Well said. Thank you for teeing that one up, Parallax. Look, Declan, I think you've done an amazing job. We might wind it up there, mate. Thank you so much for everything. I really enjoyed that chat. And as I say, I hope you enjoyed it too. Mate, let me give you an opportunity now to go nuts with the shout outs. Any guild or individuals or any people in the Discords or wherever you might hang out that you want to shout out, go nuts, mate. Do you do any content at all?
I don't. No, I don't do any content. I've loved tonight. It's been really good fun. So thank you so much for having me. In terms of shout outs, I would be unable to ever play Elemental Shaman again if I don't do this. So I must say hello to Indecisive on Emerald Dream EU. That's my guild. I'm an officer there, and very proud of all the work that we put in as a team to progress Mythic content on the raid front. So they're an amazing bunch of people and a pleasure to spend time with. And we do spend a lot of time together. So I'm grateful for them. And for several of them have tuned in and made a mockery of your chat section. So
no, they've been absolutely fantastic. I've loved having them there. I must say, I mean, you mentioned the Mythic rating. How are you guys going? Where are you at with it?
Oh, we finished 8. No, we didn't. I wish we. I wish we could say that we
easy
finished.
Game, please.
We're about to be 5 out of 8 Mythic. We're about to be 5 out of 8 Mythic. We've got Blood Twister at 9%. We had some issues with Rashanan. We killed Rashanan really quickly, and then we got stuck kind of re-clearing Rashanan. Kind of slowed us down a bit. But but Blood Twister's dead soon, and then watch out Nexus Princess because we're coming for you. But not in a assault kind of way. We're just gonna kill her. Yeah.
Fair enough. Well done. All right. Parallax, mate, thank you so much for joining us. Mate, you and I will have to drag our asses out of a Mythic sometime and go up my game from 0 out of 8 normal raid bosses down.
Yeah, let's keep it going. I don't typically raid. I did the raid once. It was kind of fun. But yeah, keep up the Mythic Plus grind because you're going to be Keystone Hero in no time.
Oh, mate, I'm all about it.
And I actually haven't gotten in a very long time, so we could probably we can get there together. It could be a little.
I'm due for one.
Share.
I mean, fuck, we could run some after this if you wanted to. But I've been too busy doing stupid IRL shit like learning the drums over the last 5 days and not playing enough WoW. Sitting playing fucking Coldplay's Yellow for the 5600th time, whatever, over the last fucking 3 days. But anyway, guys, thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight. Declan, mate, please stay in touch. You're an absolutely lovely individual to speak with, and mate, I'm sure the listeners will love this one. So thank you again. We'll talk to you guys later.
I'm very grateful for your time. Thanks for the chat. Take it easy.
Guys, what I'll do is I'll end the recording there. Just stick about for 2 seconds. Stream, I'm gonna end the stream, but I'll talk to the guys off stream for 2 seconds.